Hello, and welcome. Wherever you are tonight, whatever the day has asked of you, I am glad you are here. Let yourself settle. Let your shoulders drop. Let the thoughts of the day begin to lose their edges, to soften into the background like a conversation in another room that you no longer need to follow. We are going somewhere tonight, somewhere that almost no one goes. Somewhere so far from the ordinary world that the distance itself becomes a kind of permission. Permission to be still. Permission to let go of everything that does not matter in this moment, which is, when you think about it carefully, almost everything. Come with me to Antarctica. It is winter here. Not the winter you know. Not the winter of gray skies and bare trees and cold mornings that still end in the warmth of an indoor evening. This is the real winter, the absolute winter, the winter at the bottom of the world where the sun has not risen in 3 months and will not rise again for 3 more. The darkness here is total, and it has been total for so long that it has stopped feeling like an absence and started feeling like a presence, like something with its own texture and weight and particular quality of silence. I am lying in my bunk in the research station. The station is a cluster of insulated modules connected by enclosed walkways, designed not for beauty but for survival. And it has become beautiful to me anyway, in the way that anything becomes beautiful when it is the only warmth in an infinite cold. Outside the walls, the temperature tonight is minus 47 degrees Celsius. The wind is doing what the wind in Antarctica does in winter, which is to say it is doing whatever it wants, and what it wants tonight is to move across the polar plateau at 60 kilometers per hour, taking the fine ice crystals that cover every surface of this continent and redistributing them with absolute indifference. Inside, it is warm. Not luxuriously warm. Functionally warm, the warmth of a room where the heating system is working as it should, and where the insulation between you and the outside is thick enough to do its job. I have a sleeping bag rated to minus 30, and I am using it inside a room that is already heated to 15 degrees. And the combination of those two things means I am surrounded by warmth on every side, tucked into it, held by it, in a way that I find I appreciate more here than I have ever appreciated warmth anywhere else in my life. The appreciation of warmth is one of the unexpected gifts of this place. In ordinary life, in a house with central heating and the ability to step outside into a cold that is merely brisk rather than fatal, warmth is simply the default state, the baseline, something you notice only when it is briefly withdrawn. Here, warmth is something you have thought about and planned for and are actively grateful for every hour of every day. The insulation in these walls, the heating elements in the floor, the double-pane windows that turn the impossible cold into something you can look at through glass. Every warm thing here was put here deliberately, carefully, by people who understood what would happen without it. I find that deliberateness comforting. The thought that warmth, here, is a choice someone made, an act of intention and engineering, a decision that can be renewed and maintained. It makes warmth feel less like a given and more like a gift, and I receive it as such, lying here in my bunk with the sleeping bag pulled up to my chin, listening to the wind. The wind in Antarctica has a sound unlike any other wind I have heard. I have tried to describe it to people back home, and I always fail, not because the wind itself is indescribable, but because it requires the right context to make sense. At home, wind is temporary. It comes and it goes. It is something that happens to the air on its way somewhere else. Here, the wind is not temporary. It is not something that happens. It is a condition of existence, as fundamental to this place as the cold and the darkness and the ice. It has been here for millions of years. It will be here long after I am gone. I am simply a brief obstruction in its path, and the sound it makes against the station walls is the sound of something vast and patient going about its ancient business with no particular awareness that I am here at all. At 60 kilometers per hour, it is a low, continuous note, somewhere between a hum and a moan, with harmonics that shift slightly as gusts move through. The walls flex very slightly when a stronger gust hits, a movement so small I would not notice it if I were not lying still and listening. But I am lying still and listening, and I notice. The flex is not alarming. It is reassuring, actually, in the way that a ship moving under your feet in a seaway is reassuring. It means the structure is absorbing the force rather than resisting it rigidly, doing exactly what it was designed to do. I have been here for 4 months. I will be here for 3 more. 7 months in total, the length of a polar winter from the last light to the first, and I am at month 4 now, which means I am exactly in the middle, equidistant from the darkness I arrived into and the light I am moving toward. This middle point has its own particular quality. The urgency of arrival has faded. The excitement of the new has given way to something deeper and more settled, and the light at the end is not yet close enough to be a distraction. What remains is simply this: the place itself, the pure experience of being here, stripped of anticipation and no longer carrying the rawness of the new. What remains is Antarctica. Let me tell you what I know about this place. Slowly, in the dark, while the wind goes about its business outside. Antarctica is the coldest, driest, windiest, and highest continent on Earth. Higher, in terms of average elevation, than any other because the ice sheet that covers it is so thick, nearly 5 kilometers at its deepest point, that it raises the entire land surface far above sea level. The ice at the base of that sheet is so old that it was deposited as snow before modern humans existed, before Neanderthals existed, before the ancestors of Neanderthals had fully diverged from the ancestors of modern humans. The ice at the very bottom of the deepest ice cores drilled here is nearly 1,000,000 years old, and the air trapped in its bubbles is air that no living creature has breathed since it was sealed in. I think about that often. The air in those bubbles, the atmosphere of a world before our species, preserved in the ice of the coldest place on Earth, waiting to be read by instruments we had to invent to understand it. The ice is a library. The deepest ice is the oldest books, and the reading of them has told us things about the history of our planet's climate that we could not have known any other way. Things about how much carbon dioxide was in the air when the mammoths were alive. Things about the temperature of the ocean when the great ice ages came and went. Things about cycles of warming and cooling so long and so regular that no single human lifetime could perceive them. Only the slow, patient science of people willing to drill into old ice and listen to what it says. Outside my window, which is small and triple-paned and currently showing me nothing because the outside is a darkness so complete that the window is simply a slightly colder version of the wall it is set in, the ice sheet extends in every direction without interruption for hundreds of kilometers. To the south, where the South Pole is located, the surface is almost perfectly flat, a white plain at high altitude where the air is thin and the cold is extreme and the wind is relentless. The station at the South Pole itself, the Amundsen Scott Station, sits at an elevation of nearly 3 kilometers above sea level, and the people who work there breathe air as thin as the top of a significant mountain range. I am not at the South Pole. I am on the coast of East Antarctica, near the edge of the continent, where the ice sheet meets the sea ice and the sea ice meets the Southern Ocean. From here, in summer, you can see the ocean. Right now, you cannot see anything, but you can hear it if the wind is in the right direction and the station is quiet. A distant sound so low it is more felt than heard. The ocean moving under its winter ceiling of ice, doing what oceans do with no audience and no need of one. The Southern Ocean is the most violent ocean on Earth. The winds that circle Antarctica have no land to interrupt them, not once in their entire circuit of the globe. And they have been circling without interruption for millions of years, driven by the temperature difference between the pole and the mid-latitudes, building enormous seas that sailors historically feared above almost any other water in the world. The waves in the Southern Ocean in a full storm can be 20 meters high, the length of a large building laid on its side, and they travel in sets and sequences that make the ocean surface look not like water, but like a moving mountain range in slow motion. Beneath that surface, the Southern Ocean is doing something extraordinary and quiet and fundamental. It is one of the primary engines of the global ocean circulation system, the great slow conveyor belt that moves heat around the planet and makes the climate of every place on Earth what it is. Cold, dense water forms at the surface of the Antarctic seas, sinks to the bottom, and then flows northward along the ocean floor for thousands of kilometers, displacing warmer water, driving a circulation that takes centuries to complete a single circuit, and yet without which the temperature of every ocean on the planet would be different. Every coast, every port, every fish, every coral reef, all of it shaped, in ways most people never think about, by what happens in this cold, dark water at the bottom of the world. I think about the ocean a lot here, even though I cannot see it in the winter dark. I think about it the way you think about something large and important that is close to you but hidden. The way you might think about a mountain in fog, knowing the mountain is there, feeling its presence in the quality of the air and the way sound behaves differently because of it. The ocean is there, a few kilometers from where I am lying, doing its vast and necessary work in the dark, and knowing that it is there is enough. There are penguins out there somewhere. Not right here, not in the dead of winter, but not far. Emperor penguins breed on the sea ice in winter, the only large animal on Earth that chooses the Antarctic winter for breeding rather than fleeing it. And their colonies are not more than a day's travel from this station. I have not seen them in winter. I saw them in autumn, before the darkness closed in, and the memory of them is something I return to on difficult nights. Emperor penguins are about a meter tall. They are the largest living penguin species, and they are, in person, both more impressive and more comic than any photograph prepares you for. Their faces are extraordinary. The long, sleek black head, the yellow-orange patches at the jaw, the look of dignified but slightly baffled inquiry that seems to be the default expression. They move on land with a rolling waddle that looks precarious but is in fact perfectly efficient. And they move through water with a grace that makes the waddling seem retroactively unimportant. In the water, they are something else entirely. They are speed and precision, and the effortless expression of a body shaped by millions of years of evolution for a single purpose. In winter, the male emperors stand on the sea ice in groups of hundreds or thousands, each one with an egg balanced on his feet and covered by his belly pouch, incubating in the deepest cold, fasting for weeks while the females are at sea feeding. They huddle together for warmth, a mass of black and white and yellow that shuffles constantly, the ones on the outside moving toward the center to warm up, the ones in the center moving toward the outside as they warm. A slow, continuous rotation that distributes the warmth evenly through the group. The huddle breathes. It pulses gently. It is one of the most extraordinary examples of collective behavior in the natural world. 1,000 individual animals functioning as something that is more than any of its parts. I think about the huddle sometimes when the wind is particularly strong. The idea of warmth as something distributed, something that belongs to the group rather than to any individual, something that is created by closeness and maintained by the continuous willingness of each member to give and receive. There is something in that which feels important, though at this hour I am not reaching for its implications. At this hour, I am simply glad that the penguins are out there in the dark, doing what they have been doing for millions of years, warm in the middle of the coldest place on Earth because of each other. The aurora australis appeared last night. I went outside to see it, which required putting on every layer I own and standing in the 60-kilometer wind for 20 minutes with my face the only part of me exposed. But it was worth it without any question. The southern lights are one of the phenomena that photographs cannot adequately convey, not because photographs fail to capture the colors, which they do quite well, but because they cannot capture the movement. The aurora moves. It pulses and shifts and folds and unfurls like something alive, like light that has learned to be liquid, flowing across the sky in curtains that billow and contract with a slowness that keeps you always waiting for the next movement before you have fully absorbed the last. The colors last night were mostly green, the common color of auroras at this latitude. But there were bands of pink at the edges of the brightest curtains, and once, for a period of perhaps 30 seconds that felt much longer, a deep red that spread across the southern sky and then faded as if it had decided against staying. Green is produced by oxygen atoms at altitudes of around 100 kilometers, excited by charged particles from the sun and releasing that energy as light as they return to their normal state. Red comes from oxygen at higher altitudes, above 200 kilometers. The pink comes from nitrogen. The aurora is chemistry, solar physics, the interaction of the sun's magnetic field with the Earth's, a process happening 300 kilometers above my head that produces something I stand in the cold and stare at and cannot quite believe is real. The cold on my face during those 20 minutes was remarkable. -47, and the wind adding an effective temperature considerably lower than that, against the skin of my cheeks and forehead. I could feel my face cooling in a way that is unlike the cooling of an ordinary cold day. On an ordinary cold day, the cold sits on the surface of your face. Here, it moves inward, slowly but perceptibly, and you are aware of your face not as surface but as depth, as something with interior warmth that the outside is very quietly trying to reach. I stood and watched the aurora and felt my face cooling and thought about the emperor penguins a day's travel away, standing in this same air with no shelter but each other, and felt something that was not quite admiration, but was in the vicinity of it. Back inside, peeling off the layers, the warmth of the station hit me in a wave that was almost physical, almost something you could push against. The contrast between outside and inside here is so extreme that crossing the threshold between them is less like entering a room and more like entering a different category of experience. The warmth is palpable. You receive it with your whole body. And then, after a few minutes, it becomes merely normal again, which is perhaps the most remarkable thing about human adaptability. The speed with which the extraordinary becomes the baseline. I made tea. I make tea every evening before sleep, the same ritual I observed on the Mars story. And I think it is not a coincidence that on both of the most remote posts where humans have spent extended time, the making of hot drinks has become a ritual of such importance. There is something about the act of heating water, of holding a warm cup, of drinking something that carries heat into the interior of your body, that is deeply reassuring in a cold place. It is the most direct possible physical expression of the idea that warmth is something you can actively create and then consume, take inside yourself, carry around. The tea I make here is simple. I have a selection of ordinary tea bags, a small electric kettle, a metal mug. The whole process takes 4 minutes. It is one of the least complicated things I do all day, and it is the thing I look forward to most. There is probably something worth thinking about in that, but I am not going to think about it tonight. Tonight, I am just going to drink the tea and let the warmth of it move through me and be glad I am inside and not outside. The research I am doing here is concerned with the ice cores I mentioned earlier. My specific work is the analysis of trace gases in ice cores drilled over the past several decades, looking at the record of atmospheric chemistry going back through hundreds of thousands of years. Every day I work in the cold laboratory, a separate module kept at a temperature that preserves the ice samples, which means that my working environment is colder than my living environment, and considerably more so than what most people would consider a reasonable room temperature. And I measure and record and analyze. The work is slow and requires extraordinary precision. A single sample, a sliver of ice no bigger than my finger, represents several centuries of atmospheric history, and the measurements I take from it will contribute to a data set that has been built by hundreds of scientists over decades and will be used by hundreds more in the decades to come. This is normal science. Not glamorous, not dramatic, not the kind of thing that makes it into headlines. Just careful, patient work in a cold room, building knowledge one measurement at a time. I find great comfort in it. The regularity of the process, the clarity of the purpose, the fact that I am here in this extreme place, doing something genuinely useful, something that connects me to a community of scientists spread across time and institution, all of us working toward an understanding of the planet's climate that none of us will live to fully achieve. Science is the longest game there is, longer than any civilization that has played it. The questions I am contributing to answering were first formulated by people who are long dead, and the full answers will be understood by people not yet born. I am somewhere in the middle of a conversation that has been going on for centuries and will continue for centuries more, and there is something profoundly settling about that position. Not small exactly, but appropriately scaled, appropriately humble, the right size for a single person to be. The ice in my samples tonight is 180,000 years old. It was deposited as snow when Homo sapiens had not yet spread out of Africa, when Neanderthals were alive in Europe, when the last great ice age was in full swing, and ice sheets extended across what is now northern Europe and North America, and the sea level was so much lower than today that the shape of every coastline was different. The air in those bubbles breathed the chemistry of that world, and I am reading that chemistry tonight in a cold laboratory in Antarctica, and the information it carries connects me through the ice across those 180,000 years to a world utterly different from my own. I find this thought not diminishing but expanding. The usual effect of contemplating deep time is to feel small, and I understand that response. But it is not the one I have here. Here, in this place where the ice that surrounds me is itself a physical record of deep time, the sense I have is less of smallness and more of connection. I am part of the same story. I am one frame in a very long film. The frame matters even if the film is incomprehensibly long. Let me tell you about the stars. In the Antarctic winter, when the sky is clear and the aurora is absent, the stars are extraordinary. Without the 24-hour daylight of summer and without the light pollution of any city within thousands of kilometers, the winter night sky here is the darkest and therefore the most detailed sky most humans will ever see. The Milky Way, which has become a novelty for most people living in the developed world because it is washed out by artificial light, is here a physical presence, a broad river of light so dense that the dark patches within it, where dust clouds block the stars behind them, are themselves noticeable, the way words on a page become visible against their background. The southern hemisphere stars are different from the northern ones. And I say different rather than unfamiliar because I have spent enough time with them now that they have become the familiar ones. And the northern constellations that I grew up with would feel unfamiliar if I could see them. The Southern Cross hangs in the sky here like a fixed point, and the Magellanic Clouds, the two small satellite galaxies of our own Milky Way that are only visible from the southern hemisphere, sit in the sky like detached fragments of the Milky Way itself. A little to one side, two smears of soft light that are in fact each billions of stars seen from a distance of 160,000 light-years. I think about the Magellanic Cloud sometimes when I am outside. The large Magellanic Cloud contains several 100 billion stars. Each of those stars may have planets. Some of those planets may have conditions suitable for life. On the night I first understood this properly, not abstractly but viscerally, standing outside in the cold with the Magellanic Cloud clearly visible above me, I felt something that I have been trying to describe accurately ever since and have not quite managed. It was not awe exactly, though it was in that territory. It was more like a sudden and complete recalibration of scale, the feeling you get when a mathematical abstraction you have known for years suddenly becomes physically real. 160,000 light-years is not a concept I can hold in my body. But I can hold the Magellanic Cloud, that soft smear of light above the southern horizon, and knowing that it is as far away as it is makes it feel less distant somehow, not more. The universe was suddenly in the room with me, just on the other side of the cold. Inside the station, the lights have been dimmed for several hours now. We dim them in the evening as a matter of routine, the way you might at home, to signal to our bodies that the day is ending and sleep is appropriate. In a place with no natural light cycle to guide the circadian rhythm, this artificial dimming becomes important. Without it, the body would have very little information about what time of day it was, and the result would be a gradual drift of the sleep-wake cycle that would eventually make everyone non-functional. We create the cycle deliberately, as we create so much else here deliberately, because the natural cues that most people rely on without thinking about them simply do not exist. My colleague who works in the atmospheric chemistry laboratory, a few modules along the enclosed corridor, is likely already asleep. She goes to bed earlier than I do and wakes earlier, and we have established between us a comfortable division of the station's quiet hours, overlapping enough to share meals and the small conversational rhythms of shared life, separate enough that each of us has a genuine period of solitude each day. Solitude here is not a luxury. It is a psychological necessity, as basic as food and warmth, and the station's designers understood this and built it in. Each person has their own small sleeping space, their own private corner of the insulated world. The solitude I have found here has a different quality from any I have known elsewhere. Solitude at home means the absence of other people in your immediate environment, but it does not mean the absence of their presence in the wider world. At home, when you are alone in a world full of people, and their proximity is ambient, felt through the sounds of traffic and the glow of other windows at night, and the sense that if you needed to, You could reach one of them in minutes. Here, the nearest significant settlement outside this station is thousands of kilometers away. The nearest large city is on another continent. If you step outside this building without proper protection, the world will kill you with complete indifference in a matter of minutes. That combination, complete isolation from humanity combined with an environment of absolute physical danger, produces a quality of solitude that has no equivalent anywhere I have lived before. It is clarifying in the way that I imagine extreme conditions are generally clarifying. It removes everything that is not essential. It reduces existence to its core components: food, warmth, work, sleep, the small community of the station, and the ice and the dark and the wind outside. And in that reduction, something unexpected has happened. I have become here more content than I have been in a long time, perhaps ever. Not happy in the way that usually means something, not excited or stimulated or pleasurably occupied, just content, at peace with where I am and what I am doing and what I have and what I do not have. A state of mind that I did not expect to find at the bottom of the world, and am not entirely sure I will be able to carry back when I leave. I think it has to do with alignment. At home, there is always a gap between where you are and where you think you should be, between what you are doing and what you think you should be doing, between the life you have and some imagined better version of it just out of reach. Here, that gap does not exist. There is nowhere else to be. There is nothing else to be doing. There is no imagined better version. There is only this: the ice and the work and the warmth and the wind and the extraordinary privilege of being one of the very few people on Earth who has ever been here. The gap between the actual and the ideal has closed, and in its absence, what remains is simply the present, and the present, here, is enough. The wind outside has shifted slightly. I can hear the change in pitch. The way the note it makes against the station walls has risen by half a tone or so, which means the direction has changed, and the wind is now hitting a different surface at a slightly different angle. I know the acoustics of this building now the way you come to know the sounds of any place you have lived in long enough. The creak of the corridor when the temperature drops particularly fast. The particular rattle of the window nearest my bunk when a strong gust hits it directly. The deep subsonic hum that runs through everything during a severe storm, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. These sounds are my companions. In the absence of the ordinary soundscape of human life, traffic, voices, music from other rooms, the ambient noise of a populated world, these sounds have become what fills that space. They are not intrusive. They are not disturbing. They are simply the voice of the place where I am, and I have learned to receive them the way you receive any familiar voice, as evidence of presence, as a kind of company. The ice beneath this station is more than 2 kilometers thick. Beneath the ice is rock, the actual rock of the Antarctic continent, compressed under the weight of all that ice to the point where in many places the bedrock is below sea level, even though the surface is thousands of meters above it. If you remove the ice, an experiment the planet may conduct over the coming centuries, depending on choices currently being made, the continent would over thousands of years slowly rebound upward as the weight was removed, a process called isostatic rebound, the rock expressing its preference for its natural position once freed of the burden pressing it down. There are lakes under the ice, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, liquid water trapped between the base of the ice sheet and the bedrock below, kept liquid by geothermal heat from the Earth's interior and by the insulating pressure of the ice above. Lake Vostok, the largest of them, discovered not by drilling but by radar measurements of the ice above it, is about the size of Lake Ontario, one of the Great Lakes of North America, and it has been isolated from the surface world for at least 15 million years. What is in that water, if anything, is a question that fascinates scientists and that has not yet been fully answered. The water has been sampled in limited ways, and what has been found is microorganisms, life, small and extremophilic, and adapted to conditions that have no sunlight and no surface connection, and nothing to recommend them to any living thing that is not specifically evolved for exactly those conditions. Life finds a way. This has been one of the consistent surprises of the last several decades of biology. The discovery that life is not confined to the comfortable middle range of conditions where humans and most familiar organisms live, but extends far into extremes that once seemed definitively inhospitable. Organisms living in boiling water at hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. Organisms living in the dry valleys of Antarctica where there is almost no moisture and the UV radiation is intense. Organisms living in extremely acidic or extremely alkaline environments. Organisms living inside rock, metabolizing at rates so slow they are almost indistinguishable from being dead. Life is, it turns out, less a narrow window of possibility and more a very wide range with a center and edges that we are still mapping. The idea that something might be alive in Lake Vostok, beneath 2 kilometers of ice, in water that has seen no sunlight in 15 million years, is one of the thoughts I carry with me into sleep most nights here. Not anxiously, not dramatically, just as a quiet companion, a reminder that the world is larger and stranger and more inventive than our usual assumptions about it suggest. Life in the dark under the ice. The ultimate expression of the finding that nothing is as uninhabitable as it looks. That patience and the willingness to try impossible conditions will reveal life where none was expected. I wonder sometimes about those organisms. What it is like to be them, if that is a question that makes any sense about a single-celled organism living in the cold dark. What constitutes their world? Whether world is even a concept that applies to something with no nervous system and no ability to model anything beyond the chemical gradients in the water immediately surrounding it. Almost certainly not. And yet, they are alive, in the most fundamental sense of that word. They take in energy, they produce complexity, they reproduce. They have been doing this since before our species existed. They have outlasted entire geological epochs down there in their dark lake, doing their slow chemical business, needing nothing from the surface world they have never seen. The humility this produces is genuine and I think healthy. Whatever I am worrying about, whatever the difficulties of my days seem to weigh, there are organisms under 2 kilometers of ice that have been quietly alive for 15 million years, without any of the things I take for granted, and they are fine. They are, in their own terms, thriving. Scale and context. The ice provides both. It is late now, or what passes for late in this perpetual dark. The instruments on the wall tell me it is past midnight local time, and my body, tutored by 4 months of consistent schedule, agrees. I can feel the particular quality of tiredness that belongs to this hour and this place, not the edgy exhaustion of an overstimulated mind resisting sleep, but the clean biological tiredness of a body that has worked and eaten and rested appropriately through the day and is now ready, genuinely and completely ready to stop. I have noticed that I sleep better here than I have slept anywhere in years, possibly ever. In ordinary life, sleep is something I approach with some negotiation. The mind still active, the thoughts still circulating, the transition from wakefulness to sleep requiring effort and sometimes pharmaceutical assistance. Here, I lie down and I am asleep within minutes. I wake once or twice in the night, briefly, register that I am warm and the station is functioning and the wind is the same wind that it was before I slept, and I return to sleep immediately. I sleep deeply, and I wake feeling as though sleep has done what it is supposed to do, has genuinely restored something, has cleaned and reorganized and prepared the system for another day. I attribute this partly to the complete darkness, which removes all the small visual stimulations that interrupt sleep in ordinary lit environments. The room is dark here in a way that a room at home almost never is. No LED indicator lights, no glow from the street, no faint blue of electronics. Just dark. And partly I attribute it to the physical reality of the cold outside, which seems to communicate something to the sleeping brain about the appropriateness of rest, about the advisability of stillness, about the biological wisdom of staying exactly where you are warm and doing nothing until morning. The cold outside is an argument for staying in bed, and the body understands that argument even when the mind is not conscious. And partly, though this is harder to articulate and I am not sure I can do it justice, I think I sleep better here because there is nothing here to worry about that I can do anything about. At home, the worries are specific and actionable, and they stay present, even in sleep, nagging at the underside of consciousness because they could, in theory, be addressed if you were awake and attending to them. Here, the worries have been reduced to fundamentals that the station takes care of, and the things I cannot control. The weather, the darkness, the cold, the distance, are so far beyond any possible action that the mind eventually stops trying to act on them and simply rests. Rest as the recognition that some things are simply what they are. The wind is doing what it does and will do regardless of anything I think about it. The cold is the cold and will be the cold until the sun returns, which it will, in its own time, on its own schedule, requiring nothing from me. The ice is ancient and patient and will be here after I'm gone. And I am here, in the middle of all of it, warm and safe and rested, lying in the dark, listening to the voice of the wind and the faint sound of a sleeping station doing its work. I want to tell you about the silence before I go to sleep. In the moments between gusts, when the wind drops briefly to almost nothing, there is a silence here that I have encountered nowhere else on earth. Not the silence of an empty room, which is never truly silent because it is filled with the small sounds of a building in a world full of other buildings and the transmitted noise of everything nearby. Not the silence of a forest at night, which is full of biological sound, the movement of animals and the settling of wood and the distant passing of wind through leaves. Not even the silence of a desert, which has its own particular acoustic character. The way the lack of surfaces to reflect sound creates a kind of deadness that is not quite silence. The silence here, in the moments between gusts, is the silence of a continent. The silence of 54 million square kilometers of ice and rock with no trees, no animals, no permanent human habitation beyond a handful of research stations, no traffic, no industry, no technology making noise except the machinery inside this building. The silence has a depth to it, a distance. Sound does not travel well here. The air is too thin and too cold. And the result is that the world outside the station, in the silence between gusts, is genuinely, completely, finally quiet. I have listened to that silence for hundreds of hours over the 4 months I've been here, and I have not gotten used to it. Every time the wind drops and the silence opens up, I feel it, feel the opening of it, the sudden expansion of a world that was bounded by noise and is now boundless. It is brief. The next gust always comes. But in that brief space between gusts, I have found something that I think I was looking for without knowing it when I agreed to come here. Something that ordinary life, for all its richness, was too full to offer. The sound of nothing, the texture of complete quiet, the experience of hearing the world as it is when no one is speaking. Carry that with you. Let it be the thing that takes you into sleep tonight. The silence between the gusts, opening up like a held breath released, the continent breathing out, everything still for a moment before the wind returns. Cold out there, warm in here. The ice 180,000 years deep, full of air from a world before us, patient and old and utterly without judgment. You are warm. You are here. The wind will go about its business regardless, and you are inside it, held by the warmth that someone put here deliberately, surrounded by a darkness that has its own quality and its own beauty and its own particular form of rest. The ice is listening. The stars are burning cold and clear and steady above the clouds. The emperor penguins are standing in a huddle in the winter dark, sharing warmth, patient as the continent itself, each one carrying something precious under the warmth of their belly, waiting for the light. And somewhere, under 2 kilometers of ice in a dark lake that has been dark for 15 million years, something small and simple is going about the business of being alive, needing nothing, wanting nothing, perfectly at home in the impossible. You do not need to go anywhere tonight. You do not need to do anything. The wind is doing what the wind does, and the ice is doing what the ice does, and the penguins are warm in their huddle, and the stars are where they always are, and the Southern Ocean is moving under its winter ceiling in the dark, driving the circulation of every ocean on Earth, quietly and without audience, as it has been doing for millions of years. Rest now. The cold is outside, and the warmth is here, and there is nothing between those two things but the walls that someone built carefully, deliberately, with the full intention that they hold. Let them hold. Let yourself be held. Sleep. Good night from the bottom of the world. Good night from the ice and the dark and the silence between the gusts. Sweet dreams, wherever you are. I will see you on the other side of the night.